Welcome, everyone. We're excited to have you here for our Canvas PD series. You'll note on the bottom right-hand side of that initial slide, you can have the bit.ly, so you too can join us on our slide deck. And our names are Chris Giles. I am Carrie Coonert, Nicole Carter. We are part of the digital curriculum team. And we also have a special guest today, a special guest who's going to be showing you all kinds of amazing Canvas things. And our game plan for today is that we are going to be doing an intro. That's what I'm doing right now about how this is going to work. Then we're going to be showing you about today's topic. So we're going to be talking today about SpeedGrader. And today's session, because it's level 2, is SpeedGrader 201. So we're assuming that you already know how to use SpeedGrader, and we're going to take it up to the next level. Some more advanced tips and tricks to make SpeedGrader more efficient for you, and also using on an iPad, teacher iPad as well. After we're done presenting the information, we will have a Q&A only on the topic of SpeedGrader. So if you have questions over what we have covered, we'd like to hit those first because we are recording this session and we do want to include your questions in that recording. So as soon as all of those questions have been answered, we will stop the recording, and then it's just an open Q&A. If you have other Canvas related questions, we are happy to answer those as well with our remaining time. And this is a part of a big series. You can see there, we have all kinds of classes at 3 different levels offered for the discovery. This is level 2, the create level, and level 3, which is coming up in the new year. Some really exciting classes that we're looking forward to sharing with you. And all this information can be found in Teacher Source, so you can go ahead and register for upcoming classes. So those are linked there for you as well. And for those of you who are watching this on video after the live session, instead of doing PDUs for every single session, we've decided to accumulate them at the very end, and you can watch the whole series and get those PDU credits at the end of the entire series. So level 1, level 2, and level 3. So be on the lookout for those in Teacher Source's Anytime courses coming up in 2021. We're going to go ahead and skip all the way down to today's slide, which appears like it perhaps is slide number 26. Beautiful. Yep. So we're going to head down to slide number 26, and we're going to go ahead and start talking about SpeedGrader 201.
Okay, so I'm going to bounce back and forth between using my iPad a little bit and showing you live, because I've actually found out a few things about my own personal preferences. So if you have access to a teacher iPad, I think that it can be a way to make your grading life a lot easier. I know personally, in conjunction with using my teacher iPad, speech to text options, and rubrics, I was able to cut down my, English teacher grading essays from like 24 hours to 5 hours while still giving an intense amount of feedback to my students. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And Rebecca is going to also talk about that. She's an English teacher at Sunset. So we'll kind of touch on a couple of different things. And I think in terms of the annotation using a teacher iPad, I'm going to do that right now. So I'll share my teacher iPad and jump into the Canvas app on my teacher iPad. So give me 1 second while it's opening up. Okay, so while I'm in the teacher Canvas app, and I say that because, right, there's a Canvas app for students and a Canvas app for teachers. And is there a Canvas app for parents? I think there might be. I could be wrong.
There is.
Yes, there is. Okay,
yep.
So the Canvas teacher app, and I'm going to jump in. This was a random course that I actually made for my own child last spring, which I know you're sitting there going, oh, that poor child. But it turns out that it's become incredibly helpful for me to be able to model things for people. So this was an essay she turned in for her own teacher, but I had her turn it in for me on here as well. And it is an essay that she did on Google Docs, but she submitted it not as a live document, which means that I have the ability when I'm opening it up here on Canvas teacher app to go in and highlight, which is pretty awesome. I can add comments straight to that specific highlight. And, you know, I'm typing this, but watch what happens when I instead use the speech to text option. I'm going to unclip my keyboard that's attached to my iPad. And instead, I'm going to click the microphone next to the space bar. This lead looks great. So infinite ways for you to become a little bit more efficient with what you're doing by utilizing some of the pieces that are kind of inherent to the teacher iPad. Now, I'm referencing the ability for us to use, so I have like my stylus, and then I can just go in and I can write over the top of the essay. So you can do these same things on your teacher computer, but you're using a trackpad, which in my opinion is a lot more difficult than picking up a stylus and being able to write over the top. And again, if it comes to adding those comments and information, whether I'm doing it in the app or on top of the essay, or if I'm doing it within Canvas, again, utilizing the speech to text on my teacher iPad becomes super fast and easy. And then also, you have probably a better camera maybe on your teacher iPad than just your webcam on your teacher laptop. So recording videos as comments on your iPad could also be better quality and just easy to do, but they're easy either way, I think. So that's a couple of ideas that I wanted to kind of preface. Now, I also noticed, I'm going to jump into a different assignment. Oh, wait, let me go back. There's one other thing I wanted to mention. Now, I think an easier thing to access prior to rubrics and outcomes in Canvas is the idea of giving students a template that has a rubric already on it. So this is on the Google Doc originally. Now, when I do it this way, I can then also, same deal, come in and highlight different aspects of the rubric. That also can be super easy and great ways to give feedback. Now, this is to me a substitution to what we would be doing in the classroom, potentially face-to-face, where I might have a paper copy of a rubric that I'm highlighting and writing over the top of. This still is a little bit time consuming, but a little bit easier too. Instead of having to carry home huge stacks and folders of essays, I instead just take home my teacher iPad and have access to everything. And then I can go through and do all of these pieces. Now, this is, I think, step one to rubrics within Canvas. This is a very easy way to do it. We talk a lot about how some of our MYP, PYP schools use really extensive rubrics, and this is an easier way to maybe access some of the information for those students. But what I noticed, and Rebecca might even have better options than this, but I'm going to go into a different assignment. And I noticed when I was doing this on my teacher iPad, and Chris and I are probably going to look into it later, but I added a short little rubric to this other assignment. And when I go in here, so this is a different turn-in process. So this is a turn-in of a live Google Doc. And you'll notice that I'm not necessarily getting the same kind of options to use my stylus and write over the top of. But I do have, so in other words, I can't go through and add to or highlight over the top of the rubric that is on the assignment itself. But I did add a rubric to the Canvas assignment over here. And what I'm noticing is that it's not giving me all of the information. I can really quickly just tap out, according to this rubric, this child gets a 4 out of 4 in the proficiency rubric or whatever. But when I'm opening up the long description to get more of the information from the rubric, it isn't showing up. And I think this is very interesting because I'm going to switch back over and show you what it looks like on my teacher computer side instead of this app. So this is the same assignment on my teacher computer. And look how the 4 has so much content, but that wasn't showing up on my teacher app. When I go into SpeedGrader to grade this assignment, I can actually see it, and let's see if it'll let me pull this out a little bit more. I can see it over here. View rubric. Okay. Now I can just go, oh, this child is for sure a 4, or this gets a 2, and you'll notice that it's giving me the options right on the end. So I think that that's kind of interesting. I actually might prefer to use the rubric this is a personal opinion, but I might prefer on the computer instead of the teacher iPad. So you kind of have to play around with it and see how you feel, and which works best for you. I'm going to, I think, I talked about all of these pieces. Speech to text on your teacher iPad, talked a little bit about annotating over the SpeedGrader. I want to turn it over to Rebecca so she can kind of expand on anything that I've already touched on, but then also I'm hoping she can give us some ideas on advanced teacher settings in the gradebook and within SpeedGrader when you have a larger roster of kids than what I was able to show.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nicole, it's funny that you said that because I feel that way too. When I use just rubrics, I do like to do it on my laptop. But when I am doing like comments and more feedback, I like to do it on my iPad. And honestly, when I have like my voice comments or speak to text, I prefer to do it on my phone because it, or when I want to like type it out really quick because I'm pretty quick with my phone. My slides, we're going to embed on the other slides, but they are here for you. And I'm just going to walk through some examples that I have here. So here let me go to present mode. Sorry, of course I have like 80 bazillion tabs open. So one of the things I always tell teachers is like, you are giving a lot of time to giving this feedback. So make sure that your students know how to see the feedback. I use my test student, and as a test student, when you go in, I like make sure I submit assignments, I comment on my test student, I do all of those things, and that's what I use to model all of my stuff. I also linked a video here. So a video I send to the adults at home on like, hey, this is our Canvas and here's how you see things. I find that really helpful for the adults to kind of see. I also give class time for viewing that feedback because I don't want it just out there. I want students to give me a little reflection. Sometimes I'll do a little Google form, like what's one thing you're going to take away from this? And I just read an interesting article about feedback. What can human focused design teach us? And so that's something to think about too. My next slide shows you a little bit about how I think of feedback. So like when kids are first just turning stuff in, I'm just looking to see, are they getting it? And it's like a quick feedback. And I just want like, sometimes I use like emojis like thumbs up or like smiley face or like a shrug, like I'm confused. So that's pretty fast. Mid-process feedback, and I'm taking more project-based is what I do in my ELA classes. I use like the audio comments or the speech to text, like quick things, oftentimes questions, right? Like that's super interesting. I wish, tell me more about this. And then when we're near the end of a project, that's when I use what Nicole showed, those direct annotations. And then oftentimes with the direct annotations, you know how we used to write like 3 or 4 sentences at the end of the essay? That's when I do the audio comments. So I give the overall like, hey, you'll notice I, marked this or that or blah, blah, blah. And then when I do like formal summative feedback with the rubrics, I typically just do a rubric and a quick comment. Like honestly, that near end feedback is way more time intensive for me than the formal summative feedback. The summative feedback is like, here it is, because hopefully most kids are at 3 and 4s by then, and we will have seen the growth from all of the work that we did. So here I have my rubric, and which is funny, and this seems silly, like Nicole, you were clearly holding your iPad like horizontally, and I've legit never even thought of doing that while I was grading. I always just hold it vertically. So you can see here I am, I have kind of the rubric up there. And this is what it looks like on my phone and on the app. It is pretty small to read on the phone, but you can do it. And I do tend to do it just because like everyone, I'm trying to multitask all the time. Sometimes I use outcomes and sometimes I use rubrics. And you can see here, like Nicole was showing, I have a long descriptor of the rubric here where I just have everything together. And so it's one overall grade. But then sometimes in the rubric, I do like to break up the indicators. And so that's something you kind of want to think about. The only thing that I tell teachers to be aware of is be careful of creating those rubrics with multiple indicators, because then you'll have a number like 16. And then students are like, well, I got 12 out of 16. What does that mean? And we're on a 1 to 4 scale. And so sometimes, as you can see in this next slide, you can remove the points from the rubric, which is what I like to do if I'm doing that type of feedback. So students can see which indicator they're at, but then I can go ahead and do an overall summary judgment as teacher grade and say, this overall is a 3, looking at these indicators that are there. I also, actually, I should go back. People often ask like, well, I want to be able to write comments still. You're still able to write comments even if you don't click this freeform comments. The freeform comments is like if you want to make comments on each indicator, which like in a perfect world, and I had 18 students, I might do that. But let's be honest, like I've never needed to make those really specific comments. And Rubric and Outcomes are very similar. You can see the find outcome up here. The only thing is when you're doing multiple targets, you can only add multiple outcomes. A rubric is really just one, or else you get that kind of, as I was saying, like the 12 points or the 14 points. So you just want to think through what that looks like for students. So it's clear. I also this year, in not the first time, but really have been enjoying looking at student work, because I'm using it as a really strong communication method between me and my students. So when they turn stuff in, they are often commenting to me when they turn stuff in. So they said something, I talk back to them, they talk back to me. You can see this is what the audio comment looks like here. The video comment looks very similar. I have had no questions about students and video comments. I was a little worried about like the Wi-Fi and were they going to be able to see them, but from my experience, I haven't had that issue, so it's been great. One thing I linked here for you was to set up your notifications. So I have my notifications turned off for almost everything because I don't want to be interrupted throughout the day with notifications, but submission comments I have on immediately. I want to see what students are saying to me, and it pops right to my email. I click on reply, it opens up a new tab right to the assignment, and I can write right back to the student. So I want them to know I'm looking at that, they're looking at that. I think it's a great way to talk to individual students this year when we don't have those normal like classroom conversations. And then as Nicole said, right, I love the annotation tool. I think this is huge. I'm able to write directly on the essay, say what you need to do. And one of the things we're not talking about here, but to think about too, is I have students do this for each other with those peer reviews, and they're able to give comments and do annotating with each other's work as well. I believe that's probably it. So I see there's a chat, but I can't see it right now. I'm on full screen. No, was there anything else specifically, Nicole, or?
I love that you mentioned the peer reviews. I'm going to make a note that we might want to ask you to come back and talk a little bit more about peer reviews. And I really loved what you said at the beginning about the quick formative, and then, that you've gotten through these pieces and given a lot of feedback. And I think that's what we have to really focus on, is that, and this maybe doesn't fit with what we're recording this session for, but my brain is constantly thinking about what happens when we do go back face to face, and what is the role of Canvas in a face-to-face environment. And I want teachers to realize that once you wrap your brain around some of these features, as you definitely have, Rebecca, that like you can make the comments and feedback that you give to students be so much more efficient for yourself, but just so informative for everyone. And I think that might be a really good selling point as to why Canvas is still an integral part of your curriculum once we come back face to face. Just that back and forth.
Yeah.
feedback.
One of the things I loved about it too is I hated passing back papers. Like I was great about actually grading papers, but then passing them back, like it took so much time within the class to do that. And so when it's instantaneous like that, it's like I can release the grade, right? And they all see it immediately. We can look at it, and it's just that kind of efficiency piece that I think is really important, whether we're live or whether we're CDL.
And you also touched on something that I found in the classroom as well, that you have to give time in class for students to go back and to look at the feedback, give that direct instruction, because if we don't, they might not look at it.
And I think there is a age maturity thing, because my seniors are very good. They've been trained at this kind of writing process type thing where they get it and they like want that teacher feedback. So they know like I'm going to put this in. And I always make the assignment like final copy Larson will look at, or like the big, like make sure you turn this in type of thing. The freshmen are not as great about that. And so I wonder with younger kids, I have like pushed the due date and said like, hey, this is when the final is due, clearly knowing that's not going to be the final, but that's going to be the final that they think. And so I can give that feedback and go, hey, I know this was the final, but I think you might want one more revision, and allowing hopefully students to really learn right through that feedback is our goal. So I think that's a really important part, whether you're doing projects, whether you're doing essays or any type of assessment.
I think it's really interesting to think about too, because you brought up the use of your phone, and I'm now thinking about it myself. Like, I could probably give some really quick, fast little snippets to people. I know, again, it's personal preference. A lot of people don't like to have business professional stuff on their personal phone.
Right.
But I think we're just giving some different ideas. Like when it comes down to efficiency, especially between English teachers, where we're grading essays and doing this all the time, that we've got it down to a science. Because even grading one essay with 5-minute timer on, like I said, it's like 24 hours.
Absolutely.
Looking at 180 essays. So we've definitely thought this through. So I really appreciate all of your kind of tips and tricks that you've thought through as well. I like the idea of thinking about my phone. I've never really thought about the phone.
I do a majority on my phone, and I just had students turn in projects, video projects on SpeedGrader. And so I was able to kind of be multitasking, right? Doing creating my slides for the next day. And then on my phone, I was watching their actual projects and then scoring on an iPad. So I had multiple devices going on. And they were great, but it's, you have 65 students, they're 3 to 5 minutes each, right? That's a lot of time. And so thinking about different devices and different ways to get things done. And I think thinking about whether we're back in the classroom or we're live, I talk to students all the time about having multiple screens if it's possible, because we all know how they all are for different uses and how we can use them in different ways to kind of help our workflow.
Yeah, good points. Okay, so at this point, I know Rebecca has to go to a meeting in about 10 minutes. So if there's anyone with us that has a specific question in reference to some of the stuff we've talked about with SpeedGrader, now would be the time. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or ask in the chat.
I think this year for me, especially because I tended to be the type of person where I did want that space between kind of home and work. And this year it just hasn't quite been possible with the way things look. And so me being able to have it on my phone, doing it that way, I think has made my communication and my community with my students stronger, because it feels more informal. It feels like we're chatting in the hallway when I'm really quick with the submission comments, or they give me an emoji or send me a GIF or something. To me, that's really important because I don't have that time to develop that classroom culture. And so I'm using SpeedGrader much more in that way than I ever had before, that I'd not thought about before. And so that's one thing, I think feedback is much more, I think grading is more than feedback. And I think SpeedGrader is much more than just giving out grades. I think it is communicating with your class and setting those tones and using those sentence frames with students so that when they're peer reviewing or they are on live Zooms together, they're also starting to use that language as well with each other.
I think jumping into the gradebook itself and seeing how we can go through some of the different things might be helpful, unless we have that on the docket for a different session. This is where I'm I can't.
No, I think we talked about that and how to filter or only pull out kids who had a certain criteria.
Yeah.
And Chris, while you look at that, I want to throw out, as a parent in the district, I am noticing that all of the feedback that my child is getting is corrective. And what, as a parent, I would love to see is some type of just quick, man, I see you are trying type thing. Or hey, great job on this portion. So I don't know if that's just my child, or if that is often, as teachers, we want to help encourage that growth, but we need to remember to sandwich some of that praise in there too. The only feedback that I'm seeing that from her is oh, hey, it needs to be turned in this way, or please, you forgot to do this part. So it's very helpful because she needs to go back and do that. But I feel like for her own little psyche, if her only interaction with her teachers is this negative kind of corrective piece, that we're missing an opportunity to build relationships.
I think that Rebecca literally hit it right on. When she said, I use feedback to set up, essentially to create a class culture and to communicate and build relationships with my students. I've not heard a teacher say that. I mean, maybe teachers think it all the time, and I'm not disrespecting teachers, but that's the first time I ever heard somebody say, I use feedback specifically to build relationships and to, foster class culture. And I was like, that's because in a face-to-face world, that's what we think we do, right? We talk to students, and I love her perspective. And I think that question you asked, Kristen, is fantastic feedback to just even perhaps, I'm thinking of our equity sentiment coming up or those sessions coming up, like, feedback, it doesn't always have to be you did it right or you did it wrong, right?
Right.
I think you're right. Like building that classroom, that feedback, the communication. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, we often, teach our students when we're doing critical conversations, critical feedback, to do like compliment sandwiches. And right. So maybe that's kind of where Kristen's coming from, is that idea that it doesn't have to always be kind of negative corrective, that it could also be some complementary pieces to go in there as well.
Yeah, the podcast that I threw in the link, the Cult of Pedagogy, that's a really good feedback podcast. But there's another one that I'll find a link to. In the other podcast, the individual speaking talked about using specific things about that you've learned from the students in the feedback given to them, and just like little tiny off marks, like, hey, here's your feedback. Hey, how's your dog doing? Like they'd mention something, and that person saw their feedback like skyrocket as far as how the students were engaged in the feedback they got back from the teacher. They actually read it, they responded. And so I love that.
Can you go ahead and zoom in on that gradebook and show how you can add a notes category to do that exact thing?
Yeah. So I'll show two things, and I love it. So one is I want to leave notes for now the notes are for my own personal self, like Nicole said. So if I go up to view and I go to where it says notes, I already have mine checked. So I'll uncheck it just to show you what it looks like. View, notes. This is where right here, this column, I can add any note I want about any student, dog died last week. This is great because these notes are only for me. My students will never see these notes. Now I could leave academic notes, but I can also leave other notes as well. And I think the idea of being able to integrate life with a student in the feedback, and I loved Kristen's response. Like, it doesn't always have to be, hey, you're late again or whatever, right? Just something, right? I love it. So that's one way of giving yourself some information, right? We're talking grading and assessing, one way of doing it. And then I don't have to use SpeedGrader. I could literally click on the assignment. If I wanted to, I could give my grade here, and then I could go over here, and you'll notice that when I click on the little tray, a little arrow will pop up. On the right-hand side, I can leave the comment. So I see my notes, right, that I made for that week. And then I could still leave a comment, oh, so sorry to hear, whatever it is, the feedback, and then integrate some type of that personal connection that I made with the student as far as the grading. So I haven't gone to SpeedGrader. Maybe it was just a simply complete and incomplete, right? And even in Kristen's case, the student may have turned in late, but I want to give them some positive feedback, right? So that's one space. The other thing that I love is if I want to go to the assignment, so I'm going to go right now, go to the SpeedGrader. What I want to do is set up a space in SpeedGrader where if I click on the little tiny gearbox in the left-hand corner, I can go ahead and hit options, and I'm going to go ahead and hide students' names in the gradebook. And so now I don't know who those students are. And so if I want to maybe perhaps give greater feedback or better unbiased grading, I can go ahead and cycle through my students. I mean, there's no assignments here, but I can go ahead and give feedback to them and not necessarily be so concerned about, well, I'm always looking at the student's name. Now, if the student turned in the assignment, their name on it, that's something different, but I can do that pretty quickly. The options gives me other options, like I can give me the assignments and how they come in by alphabetical or by date submitted. That's really, really important. I love that idea. And then finally, this is the part where I think Rebecca talked about, but I don't remember if she did or not, was right here in this little eyeball. I don't have to post all the grades at the same time. I mean, ideally, I'd want the grades to be released at the same time, not as they're given. And that's a huge thing, especially when you're an essay, like an English teacher, like Nicole, I talked about, like, I remember those days of grading 150 essays, 5 minutes per essay. Even 5 minutes was terrible. So I would just want to release those grades at the same time and not as they're progressing through. I don't want my students to be like, oh, I got your grade. Did you get yours yet? So anyways, a couple quick advanced features as far as the gradebook and what you can do, and then in SpeedGrader.